Hi there. I'm sure you know the saying, it takes a village to raise a child. Well, today we are saying it takes a village to educate children. In November 2020, the Ministry of Education held public consultations under the theme Transforming Education. It takes a village. With me today is the Minister of Education, the Honorable Dr. Gadsby Dolly, and together we'll be taking a look at how this consultation is helping to reshape the education system and how the National Public Consultation in 2021 that's upcoming can address any gaps in the current policy and further guide planning and decision making. Wow, that's a mouthful.
Yeah.
Hi, Minister, and welcome.
Hi,
that felt like so much, but we're going to break it down today.
Yeah. And I think that's the whole ethos. Education right now is a lot of issues happening, all of them conflating, but that's exactly what you plan to do in this consultation.
Yes.
Break it down.
Well, before we go to what you plan to do, let's go back. Let's take a recap to the consultations that took place in 2020. Give us a brief summary of what came out of that and why it was important to do it.
So in 2020, we were facing that situation where schools had closed in March, right? And our students were out of school for the first time in anybody's real memory. They had to move online. Teachers had to be trained to teach online. Parents became teachers in their homes. So the entire situation, it was as though education had turned on its head. Yeah. And so in 2020, we went to the public and we said, listen, in all of this, what are the things that you think are most important? So we looked at issues like SCA, we looked at the Concordat, we looked at digital education and how we would do these kinds of things. So we looked at all of those things in 2020. And the public was very, very vociferous about the different things that needed to be done, how we needed to transform education, how we needed to look at the curriculum that we were doing. So all of that came through in 2020. So within the ministry, we'd have taken that back, taken a look at what came out of that report, and now itemize some main areas that we need to move forward with in 2021. And that would tie into our education policy 2022 to 2027.
Yeah.
So this consultation in 2021 is now saying, we heard you in 2020.
Yeah.
This is 2021. This is how we think we should move forward. What do you think about these specific things?
Let me you stick a pin a bit, because I know you're anxious to get into 2021, but we just want to dial back a bit, because I like the fact that you said that you were listening to what I would imagine all the stakeholders had to say. So this theme about it takes a village really means that it's very inclusive. You're including as many stakeholders as possible.
And it must be, because when we got to the point where education was taking place in the household, then I think it underscored how important parents were to the whole process. And when we were at the point where we needed to get our children onto the digital landscape as soon as possible, and we reached out to corporate Trinidad and Tobago and said, can you adopt a school? Can you help us do this? And their overwhelming response, more than 23,000 devices came through that. So that spoke to the whole village concept, not just the teacher, not just the principal, not just the student, the parent, corporate Trinidad and Tobago, everyone, NGOs, everyone needs to pitch in now, because this is literally our future.
Let's talk a bit about the data. What did the data show from what you've done, the research that you've done so far, the consultations that have been held so far?
So one of the main areas of concern was curriculum. People spoke to how we prepare our students to take place in the digital environment, how we educate them for this new environment. Another thing that came out very strongly is the individual student and how we can inform their success. And on a wider scale, the equity of education in the school. Because I can tell you this, when we had children who were not able to get online immediately and others, it showed up the differences, the gaps in the access to education. And also, when we had certain schools who were able to move more quickly than other schools, it showed up again gaps in the wider system. And so that was one of the areas. The equity of education, that's very important to our people based on what we got. The individual students and how they can be prepared. Curriculum reform, well, of course, digital transformation. And the fact that we are now in a digital world, our students are there, and how we prepare them to succeed in that way. So those are some of the cross-cutting, very important themes that you heard coming from many quarters based on the consultation in 2020.
So some of the other things that I think would have come up would have been tied into the strategic goals of the ministry. I know there are 8 strategic goals, and at the top of that list is TVET, right? Can we talk a bit about how that dovetail into the consultations? Was it a key point among the stakeholders?
It was, and it is a key point because, again, coming out of our experience, these are things that we already were speaking about. Those are things in national conversation. But because COVID became everybody's issue, and because everybody knew somebody who had a child at home or who was doing that, you know, it became very topical and national in discussion. And what we looked at is the fact that a lot of persons in the time of COVID and in the lockdown period turned to the non-traditional skills that they possess to be able to make a living. So you would have seen a lot of people cooking, a lot of people, you know, doing things with their hands that they had the skills, but they're employed in traditional jobs, if I put it that way, and they were not using those. But the fact that gardening became very important, and that the whole issue of food security and what we do and so on. So what you realize is that the importance of TVET and its applicability to actual living became more real to persons. And so this age-old issue that we have of whether TVET education is better than the academic, or whether academic is better than TVET, that became a whole discussion.
Now, the thing, Minister, is that TVET skills feed into the whole entrepreneurial innovation. And if we look at what happens internationally, the whole SME sector, you know, the whole entrepreneurial sector is probably one of the fastest growing in the world. And are we preparing our children, is what you're saying? Are we preparing our children
that exactly is the
to take advantage of these things? And then when we talk about digital transformation, post-COVID, so, you know, I know some schools were, as you said, ready for it. They could have just switched when it was time, right? What are some of the plans with regard to moving the children more into that space post-COVID?
And that's the question we put to the public in this dispensation of the conversation that we are continuing now, because we've always been speaking, but now what are the things we want to do? Should we ensure that at the primary school level, every child must be certified? So they must be able to type properly, because of course, I mean, you know, many of us can do our thing, but if you are fluent in typing, it becomes now as important as if you are fluent in writing, because you have to always be interacting on that sphere. So that fluency in typing leads to e-testing. And the fact that CXC has been for years moving towards that, and we do have some subjects here that are e-tested, but we need to move into more, because that will allow us, when we have issues like COVID, and I'm saying when because no one knows if we're going to have another issue like this, it will allow the flexibility for CXC to move into the examinations without the kind of issues we had now. So something as fundamental as having our students certified in typing, having them certified in e-literacy, so they know, for example, how to use Microsoft Word. That whole package that is so common, they have to be able to use those productivity tools. And can we allow our students to just organically develop that along the way, or should we demand and put things in place so that they have that as one of their skills moving on? And that is the kind of conversation we have, because, I mean, it's one thing to say they have to develop it. It's another thing to say they have to mandatorily do it. And that's a discussion we have with the public. And like TVET as well. It's one thing to say it's important to develop skills. It's another thing to say make a TVET subject.
Well, it's a mind shift. It's a mind shift not just for the children, but for the entire community that surrounds the children. You know, in terms of the Ministry of Education, the exercise of consultation, I know you're excited to talk about that, right? Let's talk about how that will roll out in the near future.
So we're coming back to the public now, and the first thing we're doing is meeting with our stakeholder body. Now, that stakeholder body would involve our principals associations, our teachers union, tutor. It would involve the national boards and so on, tertiary institutions, NTA, ACTT, those are accreditation institutions, and the regulatory bodies. So there's a concept and a brief that we will be putting out, and they are the ones, we've invited them already, to take a look at that first glance and look at the things that we intend to do and tell us how we can flesh this out. But of course, at the ministry, we already have a plan that we would like to put forward, but we want the stakeholders to organically come up with those ideas so that it adds to what we are looking at. And so that's phase one, and that takes place over the next 2 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks. And so that's a smaller group consultation. And once that takes place, then we will put out now to the national public early in the year, so that's January of 2022, a wider document that encapsulates what we have discussed with our primary stakeholder group, and then we go out to there. So it's the Parent-Teacher Association involved, the teachers, the principals, the national boards, and so on. So it's a nice wide range of interaction in this first phase.
What are some of the, let's drill down on some of the objectives of the stakeholder consultations that you've been having and you intend to have?
So one of the main things would be curriculum reform. As I discussed before, that's a hot topic on everybody's mind.
Oh, yes.
And what are the ways specifically? So what are the things that we introduce into the primary school system to ensure that we have the type of values, attitudes, and behaviors we want? Because if we go back to Vision 2030, there's a mandate for education. And it's not just about what the children learn in school, it's also about the citizens they become. And so the adoption of those critical values, attitudes, and behaviors. And it starts simply with discipline, tolerance, production. It starts from there, and then it spreads into, our children and their view on fairness, their view on patriotism and what they contribute to their country and so on. And if we are saying that we need that type of citizen in Trinidad and Tobago, and that's what we're educating for. We're not educating for you to pass an exam. We're educating to produce the citizens that will carry this country forward. Then how do we demand that? So do we now mandate that a child at primary school level must be involved in community activities? If we're mandating that, how do we mandate that? Do we mandate? We've been speaking all the time about Spanish and the importance of Spanish. We're right next to Latin America. How do we say our children must learn Spanish?
How do we implement it?
How do we implement that? Yeah. What do we do to implement that? So
you're talking systems as well.
We're talking systems, So there's some, so that's just curriculum reform. I spoke a little bit about digital transformation and what happens there. In terms of, our system being resilient, how do we get to the point where we have now an e-classroom for every single teacher in the country so that they can easily load information there, they can get their classes accustomed to e-testing on an e-classroom system, and that's from primary to secondary school. How do we go through that? Right? So
you know where I'm going with this then, because you're talking about training and educating the children. But once you start talking, I remember when COVID first started and the teachers were like, oh my gosh, I have to be going online and this is a whole new world for me. What has happened with human resource management development, the development of the HR for the teachers and the other staff?
Teachers have, by and large, been very, very receptive to learning the new methods. So teacher training is a big part of what was and what must be, so that our teachers can be on board, they can be professionally developed. And of course, this whole system of having an e-classroom requires dedicated staff. So that's also a part of digital transformation, bringing in human resource that deals specifically with that. There isn't that at the ministry right now. So that education technology unit, that's a part of that. And so what's also a part of human resource is moving the ministry itself forward. So the systems to deal with payment, the systems to deal with accessing services, HR services, and so on. The ministry has been doing and must move forward in having more of these online systems so that the ministry itself can operate in a digital world, because we can't have the schools operating this way if the ministry is not operating in a parallel way. So all of that is a part of that human resource development that we have to push as well.
What have been some of the challenges so far? Because it sounds really, that everything seems to be in place and there's a focus and a thrust, but there must have been challenges.
There's a focus and a thrust. But it's one thing to have your plan, and it's another thing to bring everyone along into that changed system and get them on board. Change is difficult for everyone. And when it's mandated, it's a little bit easier. So, for example, when we had to move online, we simply had to move. However, there are many other things that have to happen to allow this system to work properly. We've been operating in emergency mode. But as the emergency mode progresses, we see the need to really formalize these systems. And getting everyone on the same mindset is a constant everyday job, because there are so many different areas and they're all interconnected. So if we fall down at the level of the ministry in terms of monitoring and putting those systems in place, well then we don't see where the students need the help, and therefore we can't help the students themselves. So everything is, yes, separate, but interconnected, and that is the main challenge, getting everyone with the same mindset to move forward in the way that we need. So that's the major challenge.
Okay, now
and of course funding.
All right, so, you know, we're talking about taking the education system into Vision 2030 and the future and all of that. And I immediately think of Finland, and I know you've probably heard of how developed the education system is in Finland. Is there any form of benchmarking that takes place with models that exist internationally that we can probably adapt to suit our needs here?
Yes, certainly. That's a part of the research that goes into formalizing what plans and what are the recommendations the ministry makes. So we would look at what's happening all over. And we actually have some teachers right now, some primary school teachers who are doing a digital pedagogy course.
Okay.
And it's in association with a training institute in Finland. So they are doing that even as we speak now, so that they get on board. And of course, once they do that, then there's a train the trainers, because 100 teachers, we have over 6,000 primary school teachers. So if you do 100, well then, you know, they can now pass on that to their colleagues. But that's part of what the research is, part of what we do. But of course, there's also the issue of cultural adaptability, and ensuring that what we want to do matches our very unique culture in Trinidad.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I speak, you know, Finland is very personal to me because I've actually visited the country with regard to educational, you know, looking at that whole digital transformation of the education system. So, you know, when you're talking there, I'm saying light bulb, it makes so much sense, you know, that is where we need to go in terms of partnering with these countries that have done it and can feed into what we are doing here in Trinidad and Tobago.
And the UN has been very, very useful. UNESCO, UNICEF, Commonwealth of Learning, they are our partners in you know, making this transformation. So they have been very useful, where from the, devices, donating devices, to donating technical support, to assisting us with developing ebooks and so on. So they have been a part of it, and that allows us as well to have that input that is not just here, but gives us that global input as well, so that what we do is has that perspective.
So I have some notes here that I really want us to touch before we run out of time. And, you know, in terms of the Education Advisory Committee and the SCA Committee, could you give us a little bit of information about that?
So the SCA Committee was formulated, and this is a brainchild of the Prime Minister, to take a look at that age-old problem that we've had. What do we do about our SCA? You know, we can't just remove it. So what is it that we actually do? And interestingly, every time we've had a consultation, and we had it in 2020, one in 2016 before that, there's been no definitive word on removing SCA. The question is always asked to the public, and it comes back about 50-50. You know, do we remove it, or do we transform it, and how we transform it? So that committee is dedicated to that job. It was installed recently, and so we look forward to that consultation. They have 9 months to come back with their report. With respect to the education,
so they would be exploring the SCA, the impact on the children, the parents, and all of that.
They'll be speaking to the denominational boards. They'll be speaking to our SSSD, Student Support Services, about, you know, how they treat children who may not have passed for their first choice, and you know, may feel, you know, like they're failures and so on. They'll be speaking to a wide range, the widest range of people possible, to come up with the ideas.
Look forward to that in 9 months.
Definitely look forward to that. 9 months is almost like they're going to, you know, give birth to something that will be great for us. And the Education Advisory Committee, that's a committee appointed by the minister, also to assist with policy and to give direction, and to, you know, so they are a wide-ranging committee as well that looks at education from all different paradigms, and so can pronounce on, you know, some of the things that are happening, current issues in education, to again give guidance and so.
We were speaking about digitalization before. What ICT systems are in place, or are we still implementing?
So we do have a school learning management system. We do have that at the ministry. We do have an education management information system. And we do have a system where you can report infrastructure issues at school. So these exist. However, they need to be optimized. And that is why we need that educational technology unit at the ministry.
Yeah.
So Cabinet did approve that, and so that is being staffed as we speak. So they will be the ones to really pay the full attention to getting these systems up, running, optimized, getting the teachers trained, students trained, parents trained where necessary, managing the systems, setting up the e-classrooms. So these are the people that really will be doing that bulk of work. As it is now, that's not the work of the IT division, it's not the work of curriculum. You really need a mix, and that's where educational technology comes in.
You know, we're talking around a number of topics, but we have to get back to the fact that this is really the beginning of a second round of consultation, and that persons need to be involved. How can persons be involved? Is it open to, I know the first part is really
the first part is
a focus group,
yeah.
Right? But then if persons wanted to participate in the consultations?
From January, I think it's about the 18th of January.
Yeah.
The information will be out there. The entire concept note will be out there as well. So persons would be able to take part in our town hall meetings, well, virtual of course, take part in the, we'll have the focus groups as well. And
this is anybody?
Anybody.
Because we want everybody.
Yeah, we're going to have also drop-off points,
right,
as we did for the last one, where you can actually write if you want pen and paper, because some people are, prefer that. You can write and you can submit that. We will have an email address. We had WhatsApp last time. We'll have that as well.
Yeah.
So we're trying to cover every different platform, so that everyone will have a chance to contribute, because this is our business. It takes a village, and each one of us is a valid member of the village, and we want your contribution.
You know, this lets me think that the ministry is working with a lot of data. You guys use a lot of data in terms of decision making, or is this something that you want to do or you've been doing?
This is what we do, but the systems to collect data are not optimized. So, for example, something as fundamental as the attendance register at school, that's a physical thing. And so when we had to embark on virtual school, that was a system that had to be put in place. And so there is another system as well, a student management system, that has to be put in place, because we need to be able to collect data and to crunch data very quickly. That's not something that the ministry was doing in its fullest potential at the time. So we do use a lot of data, we do have a lot of data, but there's a lot more data now in this modern education system that we have to have facile procedures to collect. One of the main things our principals, they feel a little frustrated about now is that we're always asking for data. And,
record and forecast.
Yeah,
you want to know how I know that? My mother was a principal.
Okay, well, you see? So that's one of the things. So we really have to put those in place, and we're working on those things. So bit by bit.
Well, I am a data person. I like the idea. I like the fact that, it's decision making based on data.
There's a lot of data that comes into the ministry from the examinations. Just SCA alone, I mean, you can imagine the different permutations, by school, by gender, by geographic location, all of that. So there's a lot of data that comes in, and there's a lot we do use, but there's a lot more we can use.
And the idea, again, is for persons to be part of this process, not sit back and then afterwards they well, we know the society we live in, right?
It's always going to be that, but we're hoping to get as much as we can. Okay,
and as we get to the wrap-up point, what happens after all of this? When you have the consultations, what is the roadmap, the end goal?
The end goal is the Education Policy 2022 to 27. And that policy is to be a living, breathing document that is accessible by and understandable to everyone. So that is not a policy and its format, and we're going to take great pains to ensure that is how it is presented. Persons must be able to read it and see where we are going, the common person.
Yeah. As the ministry goes through the exercise, though, of the consultation, the systems and initiatives that need to be put in place to allow for the transition to this policy. We have a little time again. Let's give us a little bit about that.
Well, that is what exactly. So this year, 2022, that's coming up, it's going to be about approving that policy. It's going to be about implementation of that. Yeah. And with each objective, we have 8 objectives in this policy that we intend to proceed with. They will have action plans associated with them. And under each of the specific goals, their objectives, and they will have action plans. And that is how we monitor ourselves. We know if we're moving forward, and if we are stalled, and if we have challenges, and so on.
I think we kind of spoke around some of those objectives in terms of strategic goals and so on, in terms of the digital transformation, curriculum reform, and TVET. But I did some research, and I'm seeing here the Education Act, which is something that is important in terms of reviewing
Critical.
Yeah.
There's some things that we have to look at. ECCE and tertiary education, they need to be involved in the Education Act. They are not at this time.
Right.
What the things we do with about student truancy. Absenteeism has been a big,
we need a part two. We didn't even touch on that.
Exactly.
That's a big one.
And we need to deal with what are the fines. The fine is, I think, $75 for not sending a child to school. And if we want to ensure that students come to school, we have to be a little better than that, you know. So these are some of the things. What we do when students are suspended, suspension and that kind of thing of keeping children home. Do we really want to continue with that, or how do we want to enhance that? Because if a student is being suspended, they need attention. And it's keeping them home, really give them the attention that they need. So all of those things are enshrined in the Act, and that's why we need to look at the Act itself and make those legislative
You also need to juxtapose that against transition of learners and the environment from which they come, because we may speak of truancy on one hand, but on the other hand, we're looking at these socioeconomic factors that contribute to
and that's
that
why
sort
that
of behavior.
objective about student achievement, individual student achievement, that pillar is also critical, because we need to look at where our children have the issues and what we are doing to intervene. And we have to, again, the record keeping, the digital transformation, we must be able to track a child from the time of intervention, the first intervention, along the way, so we can look back and see what we have done, how it has affected the child, and how we can continue to make this child into a productive citizen.
And then that comes into equity.
Exactly.
Yes, equitable, which is a tough one, because I was thinking, I was reading it through and I'm thinking, equity is such a difficult goal to achieve concept, because the fact is that some children are in positions of privilege in terms of where they live and, the appearance, the exposure, that sort of thing. And how are you going to manage to make that possible?
And that's the thing. So where we have schools that have a lot of children who require necessary intervention, what is the system doing at the school to be able to afford them that? What are the extra things that school would need? In some of the other systems, they would give these types of schools more funding.
Yeah.
And the schools that don't have that kinds of problem, less funding. Is that something we're willing to consider in Trinidad and Tobago? So these kinds of things are what we really need to discuss, because we can't say we want a change if we don't change anything and expect a different result.
Let me ask you something. You prepared? Are you prepared? Because when the people come out, when you guys come out and they start to say, we need this, we need this, we need this, then the next stage is they want to see it. They want to, and that's when, the whole...
And that's why this concept of a plan that stretches 5 years is important.
Yeah.
And that's why we need to have the action plans put in place, so we know the milestones along the way. We didn't get here in 5 years. We didn't get here in 2 years. We didn't get here in 10 years. So therefore, the way out of the abyss, and I'm saying abyss because we have 48% of our students at SCA getting less than 50%. And that is, the country we have to face that reality. That's where we are. We're spending a lot of money on education for, all years. But
what about
are
CAPE?
we really getting what we want?
On CAPE?
CAPE, I don't have the CAPEs that's in front of me, but CAPE they're going to be better, because remember, it's not all the children going to do CAPE. So generally, the children who choose to do CAPE, you're going to get a much better result
and
there.
CXC.
And CXC.
Right.
But by the time you look at a SCA cohort and a CAPE cohort, it's a lot.
And you're talking about
difference in
48%
size.
of 18,000 children, because that's about the amount that...
And then let's talk about the fact that 61% of the schools get students who have scored less than 50, as 75% of their Form 1.
Which is why we need to do something.
50.
And the way to do something is to come out and make your voices be heard at the consultation, right? Which is
the reality. Come to the consultation, tell us what you think, and let's come up with an action plan, and let's work our plan over the years. It's not a quick fix, not a magic wand, but we can do it if we apply ourselves and we put in the work over the years.
Minister, I want to thank you very much for joining us on this one-on-one. I'd love to do a part 2, because I feel there's so much to talk about when we're talking about it takes a village to raise a child. It takes a village to educate a child. How you like that? I kind of turn it around for you.
I'm taking that.
You're taking
that. Right? So dibs, takes a village to educate a child.
Yes.
You heard it first on this one-on-one.
You sure did. All right, guys. This is where we bring it to a close right now.